On a morning 565 years ago, the King of England, Henry VI, would have been walking up this street, ready to set up camp for a long day of negotiation ahead. Meanwhile, his retinue of 2,000 men and servants would have fortified their position by raising barricades on all the roads leading into the town. Richard, Duke of York, would have also been waiting, with his armed retinue of 7,000 men. He knew negotiation would be fierce. His freedom was at stake. Tensions were high and tempers flared, resulting in, by all intents and purposes, a medieval brawl.
The first Battle of St Albans that sparked 32 years of warfare in England was not what we might expect from a medieval battle. There was no chivalry, no honour, it was more like two groups of thugs just slugging it out in the streets. But one thing they did have was loyalty, not to a king or a country, but to their lords and the families they served in exchange for protection. Today, our loyalties lie elsewhere.
To our clubs. Many of us would never even dream of betraying them, and any affront to them, our family, well, quite frankly, that is personal. This is a story of hatred and rivalry. But just like in football, money is power.
20 miles and 40,000 steps north of London lies the town of St Albans. Now, to tell this story, we can't think of it as a battle. King Henry VI and Richard, Duke of York, did not bring armies to the town. They arrived with their own contingent of loyal subjects. Attacking the king was the last thing on Richard's mind. Now, as negotiations began, heralds moved backwards and forwards between the two commanders. Look, every step counts. Meanwhile, the Earl of Warwick, also called Richard, was standing where I am now. He was on the side of the other Richard who I just mentioned, the Duke of York, who was positioned on his right. Then, on his left, that left was his father. Believe it or not, another Richard. So what do we have? We have the three Dicks. But what I'll do is I'll call them by their titles instead because it makes it a little easier. So we've got on the left, the Earl of Salisbury, in the centre, the Earl of Warwick, and on the right, the Duke of York. Or in other words, father, son, brother-in-law. One hell of a family outing. Now I'm on the other side where the barricades would have been, manned by the men belonging to Somerset and Northumberland. Now, as with any football game today, when the fans meet, they love winding each other up. And that's exactly what happened here. The Neville family, headed by Salisbury and Warwick, hated the Percy family, headed by Northumberland. So just picture this. All of Percy's men stacked behind a barricade, goading on the Nevilles from further off. The two families have been fighting over lands in the north for years, and actually, the Red Wedding episode in Game of Thrones is based on a wedding of the Nevilles that was ambushed by the Percys. As with any derby, it ran deep, it was personal, and it probably meant a lot more to these men than the issue of who actually sat on the English throne. What came first? The chicken or the egg? No one knows, but Neville's men, they stormed up the street and they attacked, crashing into the barricade. Warwick, 26 years old, no combat experience, most definitely up himself and with a point to prove, really wants to give them a damn good thrashing. He's had enough of their lip as well, but he can't move up the streets because of the barricades. So what does he do? He leads his men straight at them, cutting through the private land and their back gardens instead. Cheeky. Let's think about this for a second. These tiffs between noble families, they really didn't involve the general public. I mean, the people going about their daily lives, they probably didn't even have any idea who these men actually were. I can see it now. Thugs clambering through the gardens. They're chomping at the bit. Suddenly, the man leading them stops dead in his tracks. Silence. What's going on? They creep forward to see an old woman in her garden doing her washing. But she is giving them the death stare. They're treading on her vegetable patch. Now, they bow their heads apologetically, and they keep moving, this time treading much more carefully. They reach the end, and they charge. For Warwick! The Duke of York would have been standing where you are now. Now he looks to his left and he sees Salisbury and Warwick attacking. Now he knows full well negotiations will now break down. So he has to attack as well, because if they lose this, their heads are on spikes. He gathers his men and he leads them on a charge up this street and attacks the barricade, which would have been positioned right there. The king, meanwhile, is here in the town centre with his men sat around talking. According to the London Chronicle, he hears the fracas in the distance and he actually sends an order for them to stop the fighting. Well, this suggests that he knew full well the feud between the Nevilles and the Percys and just assumes the bickering is between them. But while this order is en route, Warwick breaks into the square, sees the king's men napping and attacks. At this point, the bells from the clock tower ring out across the town, calling the Lancastrians to arms. Unfortunately for them, many of them weren't even wearing their armour. During the fracas that ensued, an arrow like this flies very close to the king, cutting his neck on the way past. He's very quickly ushered into hiding, and his men flee the town. But what's really cool is that the bells in the clock tower today are the same bells that rang out on that day 565 years ago. Somerset, the Duke of York's mortal enemy, knows full well he will not be shown any mercy. He sees the Yorkish troops charging up the street towards him, so he takes shelter in the nearest inn. Not a good move, running into a pub you don't know. Realizing he was trapped, he decided to fight his way out. He managed to kill 4 men before finally being cut down himself. The number of casualties at the battle was surprisingly small. Only around 100 men actually lost their lives, but among the dead was Somerset and Northumberland. 2 very important Lancastrian nobles indeed. What? I've completed my 10,000 steps. One thing certainly hasn't changed. You run into the wrong pub today wearing the wrong shirt, and you might just meet the same fate as poor old Somerset. So, here's to Somerset and learning from his mistakes.
Oh, and one last thing. The peasants who have been out farming the land all day arrive home after work to find 100 dead bodies lying around. The nobles have cleared off, so, as always, the people clean up the mess left behind by those in power. Some things clearly don't change.